It's going to be a fun lesson where we're going to be focusing on the pseudo-classes. And what pseudo-classes do is they allow us to make selections as well as define the state of an element. So typically used on anchor tags where they've got the link, the visited, the hover, and the active. You can update those styling properties. It's not limited to only those elements, the anchor tags. You can place it on any element where we've got the hover. So in case we're hovering over, we're getting a red border for the images, and the other elements that we're hovering over are going a light blue. There's also where you can make a selection, so first and last child. You can do the nth child, which allows you to do even or odd. So you can do alternating styling for the siblings. Also specifying the checkbox, checking to see if it's checked, and applying styling when it is checked. And there's also the focus pseudo-class, which updates the styling properties when the focus is applied to the elements. With pseudo-classes, you can define the state of the element. So if the element, and this is typically done when we're using hyperlinks. So let's make a selection of the anchor tags, and we're going to update some of the pseudo-class properties for that. So typically we do have a value for the link itself, and these will change depending on if it's already been clicked. So this is a default property of the hyperlinks. And if you want to change those, so all of these links that we currently have, if we set them up as a brand new link, so that means that the link hasn't been visited, we can set the property for the link, and let's update the color. So that's going to mean that if we have a hyperlink that hasn't been visited, that will go red. And I'll update this to have a different value. So now we see that the ones that haven't been visited go red. We also have links that have been visited. So let's set a default brand new value for the visited state of the link and update that. And the ones that have been visited, let's set that to be green. So that goes for all of the other links that we have. You can also set a hover effect. So whenever you hover over the link, so right now by default there is no hover effect to it. So sometimes you're going to do that, you've got the text declaration and set that to none. So as we hover over it, the underline disappears. You can also update the background color of the elements. So as we hover over them, let's set them to red, and we'll set the color of the text to be white. So that gives you this type of effect that you commonly see within the navigation menus. There's also an active state. So let's select the elements and update its active state. And active, let's set this as this type of color for the active. And what active means that whenever it's clicked down. So as I'm hovering over it, if I press it, then that's going to go green. So that's going to give us the active. Let's also update the font size so it's a little bit more visible as I'm pressing it. So when it is clicked, it gets big, and then when I release it, it goes back to the default sizing. So that's the active state, and those are typical pseudo-classes that you might have, that you have for the anchor tags. So it doesn't have to be just on anchor tags. You can set it up on other page elements. So for instance, I'm going to select the images. I'm going to set the width of the images to be 100 pixels, and we'll set the height of the images to be 100 pixels. So that will make them a lot smaller. Let's apply a pseudo-class to them. And whenever we hover over the images, I'm going to select the border, and we'll set up a border of 3 pixels. And it'll go red when we hover over it. And by default, let's add in a border for the images to be black. Otherwise, the images will shift in their position. So whenever I hover over them, now they're getting the red background. Let's also add for the div and a pseudo for the div. So whenever it gets hovered over, let's update the background color and set this as the background color. And actually, let's not set that to the main div, but we'll set it to the elements that are contained within the main. So selecting the element with the class of wrapper, so that's going to be the main element, and apply that to all of the elements that are within there. So all of the child elements within wrapper that are immediately within wrapper, now we're going to have that hover effect being applied to them. So that's all of the main sections that we had within the web page. So you can also use the pseudo in order to specify one of the child. So if you wanted to get the first child of wrapper, you can specify the first child element. So this is another way that you can fine-tune the selection process. Let's update the background color for the first child and set it to red. So it's going to be the first child of the wrapper. And I'm actually going to go down to where I have the divs, and I'll give this a class of row. So it will select the first child that's within row. So it's going to be a little bit better to use. So within the row, we want to select the first column. So we can do that by selecting the class and then selecting the first child of the element. So it's going to return back the matching first child within the list that are all going to be on the same level. So all of the columns are on the same level. That's where we're able to select the first child. You can also do the last child as well. So selecting within the row, and we'll update and set the last child property. So you can set that to blue. You can also be specific. So using the nth child, so that will be the number of children. So if you want to set it for every second element, and then we specify the number that we want to skip to. So this is going to be applying it to every other element for every second element. And I'll update the color of the font to be red. So right now it's only going within the element. And let's copy these and we'll duplicate them out. So that way we can set to multiple elements that are the child elements. So when we're specifying using its index value, so that's going to relate to the second one. Let's update and set a background color and set the background color to green. So again, it's going to be the second one. We can update this to select all of the matching ones that are odd. We can also update this to select all of the matching ones that are even. So that will be applying it to all of the alternating elements. Let's go ahead and add in a checkbox within our page. So there's our checkbox with check me. I'll give it a class of checker, and we'll do a few of these. So we've got the check me 1, check me 2, check me 3, and check me 4. So that gives us some checkboxes on the page. And now let's select the elements that are the input with the type of checkbox. We can be more specific with the input types by using the square brackets and then specifying the type. So this is going to be one of the attributes of the element. And so we want to apply the checked option to it. So checking to see if it's checked and then apply some styling to it. So what we want to do, let's set a height of 50 pixels and a width of 50 pixels to this checked element. So when they're checked, they're going to get really big. There's also a focus pseudo selector, so that can be applied if we're focusing on an input. And let's update the background color of it. So set that to yellow. And I'm actually going to update and add in some additional just regular inputs. So now these inputs, whenever they're selected and the focus is on them, they get the selector of yellow. And the checkboxes, they're still going to be updating as they're checked, just as we did with the checkbox. So selecting the input and then also selecting the type as text. So that will apply that property. And some of the properties are not going to be available to all of the page elements. And those are just being set as the default background colors for them. Try it out and see what you can do with the pseudo classes. Try out the different pseudo classes on various page elements, and you can be ready to move on to the next lesson.